I still remember the exact sound the papers made when Jake slid them across our kitchen table. Crisp, clean, cold. My heart skipped a beat, not in the romantic way it had 10 years ago, but more like missing a step on the stairs. The words petition for divorce stared back at me, harshly printed, as if mocking the very fabric of what I'd naively believed was a stable marriage. "It's over, Emily," Jake said quietly, his voice disturbingly calm, detached, as if he were telling me the weather. "You're simply holding me back." My gaze shot up, locking onto his face, desperately searching for the man I'd once loved, but all I saw was a stranger wearing a familiar mask. My chest tightened painfully. I opened my mouth, but no words came, just silent disbelief. Jake leaned in closer, his eyes narrowed, cold and calculating. "Honestly, I doubt you'll even manage the simplest tasks without me. Your entire existence revolves around needing my approval. It's exhausting." Every syllable pierced my heart, carving out wounds I knew would scar, yet I refused to let him see me break. I pressed my nails into my palms, willing strength into my trembling body. Then he smiled, that cruel, self-assured smile he'd perfected over the years. "Besides," he continued, casually glancing at his phone, "Ava understands ambition. She inspires me. She's everything you're not." Ava. The name struck me like a physical blow. My mind raced back to those late-night texts he insisted were work emergencies, the subtle scent of expensive perfume lingering on his clothes, and the hotel receipts he quickly hid beneath random papers on his desk. I'd ignored the signs because it was easier to live in denial than face the truth. Jake stood up abruptly, adjusted his suit jacket with practiced precision, and headed for the door. Pausing briefly, he turned back, his voice dripping with contempt disguised as pity. "You'll see soon enough, Emily. You'll fall apart without me. And when you do, remember, you had this coming." The front door slammed shut, leaving behind a heavy silence that wrapped around me, suffocating and relentless. Alone at the table, staring at the papers that symbolized the wreckage of my carefully built illusions, tears finally stung my eyes. But they weren't tears of defeat. They were sparks igniting the flame of a fierce determination within me. Reaching across the table, I picked up my phone with steady fingers, scrolling down until I found a name I hadn't dared contact in years, a name Jake had intentionally erased from my life. I typed a single, clear message. "Mark, it's Emily. I'm ready to fight back." As my thumb hit send, a wave of strength surged through me. In that moment, I understood one profound truth. No one else has the power to define who you truly are. That right is yours, and yours alone. And this was only the beginning. Looking back, it's painfully obvious how completely I'd lost myself in Jake. 10 years ago, our marriage had felt like the perfect storybook romance. He was confident, driven, charismatic, the kind of man people admired instantly. And me? Well, I was the perfect sidekick, a quiet shadow smiling politely at dinner parties, nodding along at his brilliant achievements, always placing his ambitions before my own. Our house was spotless, beautifully decorated, but it had stopped feeling like home long ago. Each room was carefully curated to Jake's taste, filled with furnishings he'd chosen and gadgets he insisted we needed. My opinions rarely mattered, always drowned out by his unshakable self-assurance. Eventually, I stopped giving them altogether. I remembered vividly the night he brought home that expensive fitness bike, proudly displaying it in our living room. "It cost $2,000, Jake had said, eyes gleaming. "Maybe now you'll finally do something productive with your days instead of watching those stupid cooking shows." I'd smiled weakly, pretending it didn't hurt, but the sting stayed long after the words faded. It wasn't about the money. It was about the constant reminders that my interests, my efforts, were never enough in his eyes. Then there were the small signs, accumulating silently like cracks in a dam, invisible until everything fell apart. The phone calls Jake abruptly ended whenever I entered the room, the cologne lingering subtly on his clothes, something floral and distinctly feminine, the late-night meetings he blamed on his demanding clients, and the receipts, always crumpled, hastily hidden beneath layers of junk mail and forgotten paperwork. Hotels I'd never visited, meals for two at restaurants I'd never set foot in. I'd chosen ignorance, repeatedly rationalizing away the red flags. It was easier to trust him blindly, to silence the uneasy whispers in the back of my mind. Confronting him would have shattered the illusion I'd built, that I was happy, valued, and loved. But the bitter truth I'd buried so deeply was finally rising, clear and undeniable, in the shape of divorce papers glaring from our kitchen table. As I sat there that evening, still numb from Jake's departure, my mind raced. Reaching for my phone again, my fingers hesitated over Mark's contact. It had been years since Jake had demanded I cut off contact with Mark, calling him a distraction and a bad influence. Mark had been my closest friend, kind and perceptive, the one person who saw through Jake's polished exterior from the very beginning. I'd allowed Jake's jealousy to isolate me from the people who genuinely cared. And now I was facing the consequences alone. My heart raced as my phone buzzed suddenly, lighting up with Mark's name. My hand trembled slightly as I opened the message. "Emily, I'm here, let's meet. It's time to take your life back." Reading those words felt like taking my first real breath in years. A gentle warmth spread through my chest, chasing away some of the coldness Jake had left behind. I knew now that reconnecting with Mark wasn't merely about legal support. It was about reclaiming the voice I'd long forgotten, reconnecting with who I was before I let Jake rewrite my identity. Taking a deep breath, I stood up, squared my shoulders, and walked toward the bedroom Jake and I had shared. I opened our closet, reached for my suitcase, and began packing my things with quiet determination. This wasn't the end, it was my beginning, the beginning of reclaiming myself. And for the first time in years, I felt something powerful, unstoppable, rising within me. Hope. The clock on our kitchen wall showed exactly 8:45 p.m. when Jake returned home, confidently striding through the front door as if nothing had changed. But tonight, everything had changed. The home we'd built together felt unfamiliar, charged with tension that prickled my skin. He barely glanced at me as he tossed his keys onto the counter. "You still here?" he sneered, opening the fridge casually, his arrogance radiating through every movement. "I thought you'd be packing your things and crying to your sister by now." My heart raced, fury rising like a wave threatening to crash over me. But I took a deep breath, steadying myself. Not tonight. I wouldn't let him break me again. "I'm not going anywhere," I said calmly, each word sharp and deliberate. My voice surprised even me, firm and resolute. "We need to talk about Ava and the money you've been taking." Jake froze, hand gripping the fridge door tightly, his knuckles whitening visibly. Slowly he turned toward me, eyes narrowed and dangerously cold. "What did you say?" His voice dropped to a chilling whisper, as if daring me to repeat it. "I know, Jake," I continued, fighting to keep my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest. "Hotels, dinners, gifts. You've been spending our savings on someone half your age. Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" He laughed, a cruel, mocking sound that echoed painfully around the kitchen. "And what exactly are you going to do about it, Emily? You can't even balance a checkbook without me guiding your hand." I clenched my fists, feeling a sharp pang of shame mixed with anger. For years he'd undermined me, feeding me a narrative of incompetence, slowly eroding every shred of my confidence. But tonight was different. Tonight I held undeniable proof in my hands. "Actually, Jake," I said, sliding a folder filled with documents across the marble countertop toward him, "I already did something about it." He hesitated briefly, eyes darting between the folder and my steady gaze. Slowly he opened it. Page after page of printed bank statements, receipts, and transaction details glared back at him. Cold, factual evidence of every lie he'd spun. His face went pale, mouth tightening into a thin line. "You've been spying on me?" he spat, fury flashing dangerously in his eyes. "No," I replied softly but firmly, never breaking eye contact. "I've just stopped ignoring the truth." Jake slammed the folder shut, anger radiating through every movement. "You really think this changes anything? You'll still be nothing without me. You always have been." His words were meant to wound, to remind me of my dependency, but this time they failed. Instead of shrinking back, I stepped forward, surprising both of us. "You're wrong," I said firmly, feeling an unfamiliar yet empowering strength surge through my veins. "You needed me to be weak, Jake. It's how you maintained control. But you made a mistake. You pushed me so far that I finally discovered my own strength." He stared at me, genuinely shocked, perhaps for the first time realizing he had lost something critical, his hold over me. Silence stretched between us, thick with tension. His phone buzzed loudly from the countertop, Ava's name lighting up the screen clearly between us. He glanced down briefly, visibly shaken. "Go ahead," I said coldly. "Answer it. She should know exactly what she's getting herself into." Jake snatched his phone angrily, shoving it into his pocket without answering, his facade of control crumbling visibly. "This isn't over, Emily," he hissed, backing slowly toward the door. "You'll regret this." I smiled softly, holding his gaze without wavering. "No, Jake. It's already over. You just haven't accepted it yet." The door slammed behind him, the echoes lingering. Alone again, my heart still hammered fiercely. But it was no longer fear that propelled me. It was purpose. I picked up my phone, fingers trembling with adrenaline, and dialed Mark's number without hesitation. He answered on the second ring, his voice calm, steady, exactly the reassurance I needed. "Mark, I'm ready. Let's do this." And as I spoke those words, I felt the last piece of fear crumble away. For the first time, I knew exactly who I was and exactly what I deserved. The fight had just begun. But now, I knew I could win. Days blurred into restless nights as I sifted through endless bank statements, hotel receipts, and cryptic text messages, piecing together a puzzle Jake had expertly hidden for months, perhaps years. Sitting alone in the dim glow of my desk lamp at 2 in the morning, my eyes burned from hours spent staring at screens, receipts, and the growing mountain of evidence against him. The numbers painted an ugly portrait: lavish dinners at restaurants I'd never visited, jewelry I'd never seen, weekend trips labeled vaguely as business expenses. My fingers trembled as I traced the familiar signatures, each transaction another blow to the fragile remains of my trust. Every discovery plunged me deeper into a whirlpool of disbelief and anger. How had I been so blind? Yet beneath the frustration and hurt, another feeling emerged: clarity. Jake hadn't just betrayed me, he'd methodically dismantled my self-worth, chip by chip, dollar by dollar. Just as exhaustion threatened to overwhelm me, my phone buzzed sharply on the desk, startling me. Mark's name illuminated the screen. "Meet me tomorrow morning. I found something important." I exhaled deeply, feeling a strange sense of comfort just knowing Mark was with me in this fight. The next day, we sat quietly at a small cafe downtown, tucked away from prying eyes. "Emily?" Mark began gently, placing documents carefully between us. His expression was serious, cautious. "Jake's been moving money, not just to Ava. There's another account, another woman involved. It's bigger than we thought." My stomach twisted painfully. "Who is she?" "We're still figuring it out," Mark said, voice calm yet firm. "But whoever she is, she's been funding Jake's lifestyle for months. This isn't just infidelity, Emily, it's financial fraud." I leaned back in the chair, heart hammering loudly in my chest. Another woman? Another betrayal? It felt surreal yet terribly real at the same time. My mind flashed to Jake's constant claims of being financially strained, his insistence that we cut back on my expenses, my own small purchases always criticized as unnecessary luxuries. "How deep does this go?" I whispered, unable to mask the fear and uncertainty in my voice. Mark reached across the table, gently placing a reassuring hand on mine. "We'll find out, and we'll expose it, I promise." His confidence grounded me, offering stability amid the chaos. That night, as I combed through Jake's emails, something I'd never dared before, another message flashed onto the screen, unexpected and chillingly familiar. It was from Ava, titled simply, "I think we need to talk." My breath hitched as I opened the message cautiously, my pulse quickening. "Emily, I know this is probably the last thing you want to hear, but Jake's been lying to both of us. Can we talk?" My fingers hovered over the keyboard, hesitation heavy in the silence. Ava had been the enemy, the woman who had stolen what was mine, but now, suddenly, we shared a strange, bitter kinship. Taking a deep breath, I typed a brief reply. "Tomorrow, 3 p.m., the cafe downtown." The response came almost instantly. "I'll be there." I closed the laptop, heart racing with anticipation and dread. I was stepping into territory I'd never imagined, an alliance with the very woman who symbolized my betrayal. Yet, just as I felt a moment of clarity, the doorbell rang, shattering my thoughts. I approached slowly, cautious. Peering through the peephole, my heart froze. Jake stood on the doorstep, visibly agitated, eyes darting nervously. His presence radiated anger and desperation, illuminated harshly under the porch light. "Emily, open the door," he demanded sharply, his voice muffled but menacing through the barrier separating us. I remained still, holding my breath, my mind spinning rapidly. He pounded the door louder, his voice escalating. "Emily, I know you're in there. We need to talk now." Instinctively, I stepped back, gripping my phone tighter, heart thundering in my chest. Jake had always been manipulative, but never aggressive, not openly. The fury in his voice was something new, unpredictable, terrifying. He slammed his fist against the door again. Emily, don't make me force my way in! Hands shaking, I dialed Mark's number immediately, whispering urgently when he answered. Jake's here. He's furious. I'm scared. Mark's voice sharpened instantly. Stay calm, Emily. Lock the doors and don't let him in. I'm coming over. As Jake's pounding intensified, echoing threateningly around me, I stood frozen but determined. My pulse hammered like thunder, yet for the first time, beneath the fear, another feeling emerged. Defiance. Jake believed I was weak, easily broken. Tonight, he'd discovered just how wrong he was. Mark arrived within minutes, his presence instantly diffusing some of my tension. Jake had already vanished into the night, leaving nothing behind but a chilling silence. Mark studied my face carefully, noticing the turmoil I couldn't hide. You're stronger than he thinks, he said softly. His voice, firm yet gentle, was a reassurance I desperately needed. But we have to move fast. Jake's scared. He'll start covering his tracks now. The following morning, anxiety twisted my stomach into knots as I walked into the small cafe downtown to meet Ava. I spotted her instantly, sitting nervously in a booth near the window, eyes darting anxiously around the cafe. For someone who once radiated confidence online, she looked remarkably vulnerable in person. Emily? She asked hesitantly, standing up to greet me. I nodded curtly, resisting the impulse to turn away. But I knew clarity lay in confronting this uncomfortable truth head-on. We sat down, the air thick with awkwardness and suspicion. Ava twisted her napkin, eyes downcast, avoiding mine. Finally, she spoke, voice shaking slightly. I didn't know about you, not really, Ava said softly, eyes brimming with unexpected tears. Jake said you'd been separated for months, that the divorce was mutual. He played me too. Part of me wanted to dismiss her pain, blame her as fiercely as I blamed Jake, but something in her expression felt genuine. My anger softened slightly. Ava, you said there was another woman. Who is she? She swallowed nervously, pulling out her phone and sliding it toward me across the table. Her name's Victoria, she whispered. Jake's been using her for money to buy things for me and then lied to you about it. She thinks he's single and successful. I found these yesterday. I scrolled through messages and photos, disbelief and nausea fighting for control inside me. Jake's charming texts, carefully constructed lies, promises of a future he'd never fulfill. Ava's hands shook slightly as she watched my reaction. Why tell me this now? I asked quietly. Because, Ava said firmly, wiping away a tear, when I confronted him last night, he threatened me. I saw a side of him I never knew existed. He said if I told anyone, he'd destroy my reputation. I'm scared, Emily. I think he's dangerous. I looked at her carefully, seeing beyond her carefully curated online persona to a woman just as manipulated, just as broken by Jake's cruelty as I was. Help me, Ava pleaded softly. Help me make this right. I nodded slowly, feeling an odd sense of camaraderie replace my resentment. We weren't rivals anymore. We were survivors, bound together by betrayal. Returning home, I called Mark and relayed everything Ava had revealed. Mark listened carefully, concern deepening in his voice. This goes beyond simple cheating, Emily, he said seriously. Jake's pattern of deception could mean serious trouble. He's desperate, cornered, and likely to lash out. Later that evening, as I locked up my small apartment, exhausted yet determined, my phone rang again. Unknown number. Hesitantly, I answered. Emily, a deep, unfamiliar voice spoke calmly. Listen carefully. Jake isn't who you think he is. And Ava is hiding something else, something dangerous. Be careful who you trust. The line went dead instantly, leaving only silence and the icy chill of uncertainty down my spine. My hands trembled uncontrollably. Was Ava playing a deeper game? Was there something darker, even more sinister, lurking behind this tangled web? I sat down slowly, heart racing again. Every time I thought I understood the situation, another twist emerged, dragging me deeper into uncertainty. The stranger's cryptic warning replayed endlessly in my head. Picking up my phone once more, I dialed Mark, knowing I had no choice but to trust someone. As he answered, calm and reliable as always, my voice shook slightly despite my efforts at control. Mark, we have a problem. There's someone else involved. Something is seriously wrong. He paused for a moment, sensing the urgency in my voice. Emily, stay calm, he said steadily. Whoever it is, we'll uncover the truth. Together. As I hung up, alone in the quiet darkness, I understood clearly that my fight wasn't just against Jake or Ava or some unknown third party. It was against fear itself, the fear I'd allowed to control me for far too long. I refused to be controlled any longer. And suddenly, within the chaos and confusion, a fierce certainty rose stronger than ever before. I was ready to face whatever came next. The fallout came swiftly, and it was more brutal than I'd imagined. Ava's viral video, filled with screenshots and damning evidence of Jake's infidelity and financial manipulations, exploded overnight. Suddenly, Jake's carefully built empire of lies crumbled publicly. He was fired immediately, his carefully curated reputation destroyed within hours. Yet my momentary relief was quickly eclipsed by dread. My phone lit up with calls and texts, not from Jake, but from his parents, his sister, and friends I'd once called family. Messages poured in relentlessly, filled with anger, disbelief, and accusations. How could you humiliate Jake publicly? His mother's voice cracked over the phone, thick with disappointment. We trusted you, Emily. You're destroying our family. Each word was like a dagger, stabbing deeply into the emotional scars Jake had left behind. My knees weakened, tears burning behind my eyes as I tried desperately to explain myself, but their voices drowned out mine. It felt as though I'd lost not only my husband, but every remaining fragment of belonging I once had. Sleepless nights became routine. Isolation settled around me like a heavy cloak, suffocating and relentless. Jake had manipulated everyone we knew, carefully crafting me as the villain of his narrative. The loneliness was crushing, the weight of judgment from every direction overwhelming. Yet beneath the grief, anger simmered, a stubborn refusal to surrender. Then one rainy afternoon, Mark knocked softly at my apartment door. His expression was gentle but firm, understanding etched deeply in his eyes. You can't give up now, Emily, he said quietly, stepping inside. He placed a warm coffee in my hands, looking around at the cluttered apartment, evidence of my emotional exhaustion. They're wrong. Jake created this mess, not you. I don't know, Mark, I whispered, my voice trembling despite myself. Maybe I should have stayed quiet. Maybe they're right, and I've just made everything worse. Mark took my hands gently, forcing me to meet his steady, reassuring gaze. Listen to me. My mother stayed quiet her entire life. My father's lies broke her slowly, piece by piece, because she thought silence would keep everyone safe. It didn't. It destroyed her. Don't let Jake control your story. You're stronger than this. His words resonated deeply, igniting a spark of clarity in the chaos. Mark knew pain intimately, understood the devastation of manipulation and betrayal firsthand. Yet here he stood, fiercely advocating for strength, integrity, and truth. I squeezed his hand back, drawing courage from his unwavering support. Thank you, I whispered, feeling a tiny yet powerful sense of hope begin to return. But as I sat with Mark later that evening, my phone lit up again, illuminating the darkened room. Ava's name flashed insistently. Emily! Ava's voice shook, fear unmistakable. Jake just called me. He's lost it. He threatened to expose things about me, about you. He said he'll make us regret ever crossing him. A chill ran down my spine. I glanced at Mark, seeing my own fear reflected momentarily in his eyes before determination replaced it. We won't let him intimidate you, Mark reassured, speaking loudly enough for Ava to hear clearly. Keep documenting everything. We'll handle this. As Ava hung up, silence stretched between Mark and me, the heavy quiet punctuated only by the rain now tapping softly against the windows. My mind raced, weighing the potential damage Jake might cause next. His desperation had transformed him into someone I barely recognized, someone dangerous and unpredictable. Mark finally broke the silence. Emily, this fight won't be easy, but you've already proven you're stronger than you ever imagined. I drew a shaky breath, knowing he was right, yet fear lingered. Jake's threats weren't idle. His anger wasn't trivial. My husband was capable of things I'd ignored or excused for too long. Whatever he does next, we'll face it together, Mark promised, his voice strong, confident. I won't let you face him alone. And in that moment, for the first time since this nightmare had begun, I truly believed him. Still, as I lay awake later that night staring at the ceiling, Jake's chilling words replayed endlessly in my mind, relentlessly dragging me back toward fear. "You'll regret this, Emily." His voice, filled with quiet fury, haunted me long after the darkness enveloped the room. Yet beneath the anxiety, I felt something deeper rising: resolve. Jake thought fear would silence me, but he was wrong. Tomorrow, I'd take control of my story again, whatever it cost. The stakes were clear now. My self-worth, my dignity, my very future depended on facing him head-on. And as dawn slowly broke, illuminating the room in soft, reassuring light, I knew one thing with absolute certainty: I was done being afraid. Jake's next move was ruthless and utterly predictable. With his career shattered and his credibility rapidly eroding, he turned desperate, deciding if he couldn't win back control, he'd at least ensure I lost everything alongside him. Monday morning at my office began normally enough: coffee brewing, muted conversations, colleagues typing quietly at their desks. But then whispers started, slowly building like ripples through still water. Glances darted toward me, curious and uncomfortable. My phone buzzed insistently. "You need to see this," Mark's urgent voice crackled through the line, cutting straight through my morning calm. "Check your email, now." My heart raced as I opened the attachment, a neatly typed email sent from an anonymous address, forwarded widely to colleagues, friends, even distant acquaintances. Each word was carefully chosen, twisted, and poisonous. It painted me as manipulative, unstable, vindictive, accusing me of fabricating evidence against Jake, deliberately ruining his reputation out of jealousy. Attached were doctored screenshots, fabricated conversations I never had, depicting a version of me that simply didn't exist. Blood rushed to my ears, drowning out office sounds. Around me, whispers intensified. Humiliation flooded my senses, burning hot beneath my skin. Jake had escalated the war, striking directly at the heart of my dignity and credibility. Mark met me outside my office moments later, his expression tight with controlled fury. "Emily, listen to me. He's desperate. People will believe him briefly, but the truth is on your side. Stay calm and don't give him what he wants." A reaction. "But how can I just let him get away with this?" I hissed, voice shaking. "He's destroying my reputation, my life." Mark steadied my trembling hands, his voice firm. "He can only destroy you if you let him. We have evidence, real evidence. It's time to use it, strategically and publicly." Together, we quickly organized the meticulous files Ava, Lily, and I had gathered. Jake's fraudulent financial statements, recorded threats, texts, and testimonies. My heart thundered fiercely, knowing this was the point of no return. That evening, Ava called unexpectedly. Her voice trembled yet carried unmistakable determination. "Emily, I'm ready to tell everything publicly. I owe you that. I started this nightmare. Let me help end it." Within minutes, Ava's detailed confessional appeared online, a series of candid videos shared widely across social media. Calmly, courageously, she admitted to her involvement, exposing Jake's manipulations and deceitful tactics. The videos spread rapidly, flooding comments with shock, outrage, and empathy. Suddenly, Jake's narrative crumbled spectacularly, his carefully orchestrated lies unraveling under the glare of truth. Just as Jake had underestimated me, he had grossly misjudged Ava's willingness to risk her reputation to set things right. The tide turned immediately. Friends, coworkers, even family members reached out, apologizing for doubting me. Messages poured in, expressing support, admiration, and solidarity. The toxic whispers Jake ignited quickly dissolved into apologies and acknowledgement. Later that night, my phone lit up again, this time Jake's sister, Lily, frantic yet strangely triumphant. "Emily, Jake's losing control. Our parents confronted him today. He's completely unraveling." As I absorbed her words, another message pinged insistently. This one was different, official looking. I opened it cautiously. It was from Jake's former employer, addressed directly to me. The words were blunt and deeply satisfying. "We're pursuing legal action against Jake for embezzlement and fraud. Your evidence has been invaluable. Expect our attorneys to be in touch." I stared at the message, stunned yet vindicated. Jake's downfall was now official, irreversible, his web of lies collapsing spectacularly. The following morning, as sunlight streamed gently through my apartment windows, the chaos finally settled into clarity. I stood at the kitchen counter, quietly sipping coffee, feeling lighter than I had in months. My reputation was restored. Jake's threats and manipulations were exposed, yet this victory was deeper, more personal. I had reclaimed my story, reclaimed myself, and finally stepped out of the shadow Jake had cast over my life for so long. My phone buzzed once more, Mark's name on the screen. I smiled softly as I answered, "Emily, how are you feeling today?" His voice gentle yet confident, knowing already that the worst had passed. "I feel," I paused, searching for the right word. "Free." "Good," he said warmly. "Because this isn't an ending, it's a beginning. Your beginning." I set the phone down slowly, a new kind of strength blossoming inside me, powerful and undeniable. For the first time in years, the future felt wide open, bright, hopeful, entirely mine. Jake had meant to destroy me, to render me powerless and alone. Instead, he'd given me something invaluable, the realization of my own strength, the courage to face down lies, betrayal, and fear, emerging stronger and more resilient than ever. And now, standing in my sunlit apartment, feeling truly alive, I knew with unwavering certainty I had won. The day our divorce was finalized felt surreal. Sitting in the quiet office of Mark's law firm, surrounded by polished wood, elegant bookshelves, and the distant hum of traffic, I barely recognized the man sitting across from me. Jake was a hollow shadow of the confident, arrogant man I had once known. His suit was slightly rumpled, eyes tired and anxious, unable to meet mine directly. As Mark calmly presented the final documents, Jake's fingers nervously tapped the table, his bravado completely gone. He had nothing left, no reputation, no financial security, no leverage. Yet, instead of satisfaction, a surprising pang of sorrow tightened my chest. It was strange to mourn someone who had hurt me so deeply, but part of me still ached for what might have been, had Jake chosen differently. Jake hesitated, pen trembling slightly in his hand, finally glancing up. "Emily," he started softly, desperation evident in his voice. "I never meant for things to go this far. Can we talk privately, please?" I met his eyes directly, steadying myself with newfound clarity. "No, Jake. Everything that needed saying has been said." He looked away, shoulders slumped, resigned. He signed hurriedly, his signature shaky, uncertain. I signed confidently, firmly, my new self reflected clearly in bold ink. Leaving the building, I felt lighter, freer, but emotionally drained. Mark walked quietly beside me, offering support with his silent, comforting presence. As we approached the street, I noticed Jake's familiar figure across the way, pacing nervously, eyes scanning the busy street as though searching desperately for an escape from the reality he'd built himself. Then, unexpectedly, his eyes caught mine. He froze, visibly startled, vulnerability etched starkly on his face. I paused, heart thumping with complicated emotion. Jake took a hesitant step toward me, lips parting as if to speak, but I shook my head gently, halting him. There were no words left. A sudden sharp honk shattered the silence between us. Jake jerked back abruptly as a sleek black sedan pulled up sharply beside him. My breath caught, recognizing the woman who stepped out. Victoria, the wealthy, elusive woman Jake had manipulated for months. She confronted him immediately, her voice sharp enough to reach me across the bustling street. "Jake, we need to talk. Now." Victoria's tone was icy, dangerous. I watched as Jake recoiled slightly, panic rising visibly in his features. He glanced back at me, desperation clear, as though seeking refuge. But I stood firm, unmoving. This was his storm now, his alone to weather. Victoria handed Jake a thick envelope, clearly legal documents, and her voice echoed harshly over the noise of the city. "You've got bigger problems than a divorce now. My lawyers will see you in court." Jake stared at her, then at the papers, and finally back at me, eyes wide with genuine fear. For the first time, he seemed utterly lost, stripped entirely of the control he'd always prized. As Victoria climbed back into her car, Jake stood alone on the sidewalk, shoulders hunched, utterly defeated. The sight was both tragic and powerful, a stark image of a man finally facing the consequences of his choices. Quietly, Mark placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "You all right, Emily?" I took a deep breath, watching Jake's silhouette shrink into the crowd as he walked away, utterly broken. "I'm better than all right. I finally understand now. It was never my responsibility to save him." Walking back to Mark's car, my phone buzzed softly. It was a message from Ava. Just saw Victoria's post online. Jake's finished. Are you okay? I quickly replied with genuine gratitude. I'm good, Ava. Thank you for standing with me. Sliding into the passenger seat beside Mark, a deep sense of relief settled into my bones, soothing away the last remnants of anxiety. As we drove away from the city courthouse, leaving behind a chapter filled with pain, betrayal, and chaos, I felt the weight of the past slowly lift. Mark glanced at me quietly, voice gentle but firm. You've come a long way, Emily. You've reclaimed your power completely. I smiled softly, looking forward to the open road ahead, my future, unwritten and full of promise. It wasn't easy, I whispered, but it was worth it. As we drove forward, the city skyline fading gently behind us, a newfound peace enveloped me. The storm had passed, and I'd emerged stronger, braver, fully aware of my own worth. Jake's story had ended in collapse, a cautionary tale of deceit and manipulation. Mine was only beginning, a story about resilience, self-respect, and the unstoppable power of reclaiming one's own narrative. And for the first time, I believed with absolute certainty I was finally free. Months later, sunlight gently filled my cozy studio apartment, illuminating the space I now called home. It wasn't large or luxurious, but every corner was undeniably mine, each object chosen thoughtfully, reflecting who I'd finally become. Plants flourished near the window, vibrant symbols of life restored. Photos of family and friends, reclaimed connections Jake had tried to erase, filled the shelves, each image a small victory in my healing. I stood by the window, sipping coffee, savoring the quiet rhythm of my mornings. Mark knocked softly, stepping inside with a warm smile, carrying folders filled with fresh cases. Our friendship had deepened steadily, evolving naturally into something tender, respectful, and profoundly comforting. You look happy, he said gently, placing the files on my desk. His eyes held mine softly, knowingly. I feel happy, I admitted, my voice steady, honest. More than I ever thought possible. Mark leaned casually against the doorway, watching me closely. I've been thinking, it's time you considered working officially at the firm. Your experience, your resilience, you could help many others. His words touched something deep within me. The thought of using my past pain to support others felt meaningful, purposeful. I'd love that, I replied softly, if you really think I'm ready. You were always ready, Mark reassured gently, sincerity shining clearly in his eyes. It just took you a while to realize it yourself. Just as I smiled in agreement, my phone buzzed gently on the table. Lily's name flashed brightly. Emily, Lily's voice sounded bright, upbeat. I wanted you to hear this from me first. Jake's finally agreed to therapy. He reached rock bottom, but maybe he'll actually find his way back now. I listened quietly, emotions swirling complexly. Relief, sadness, acceptance. I'm glad, Lily, truly. After ending the call, I looked thoughtfully at Mark. It's strange. All I ever wanted was for Jake to see what he'd done. Now that he finally might, I realize it doesn't matter anymore. His healing isn't mine to bear. Mark nodded slowly, understanding perfectly. That's because you've moved beyond surviving. You're thriving. Jake's story isn't your story anymore. Later, after Mark left, I walked alone to the nearby park, enjoying the warm sunlight against my face. The path wound gently through tall trees, the air crisp and clear. Suddenly, I spotted a familiar figure slumped alone on a bench nearby, unmistakably Jake. He seemed smaller now, shoulders hunched, eyes hollow, staring blankly ahead. My heart tightened briefly, sympathy flickering gently within me, but it quickly faded, replaced with calm certainty. As if sensing me, Jake turned slowly, eyes widening in shock and shame. He started to rise, mouth forming words of apology or desperation. I didn't wait to find out. Instead, I nodded gently, turning deliberately away, stepping forward down my path without hesitation. I no longer owed him explanations or forgiveness, and I refused to be drawn back into his endless spiral. Walking away felt powerful, each step purposeful, freeing. The past no longer bound me. Jake had lost all his power over my heart, my self-worth, my identity. That evening, as twilight gently settled over my quiet apartment, I stood by the window again, savoring the peace that filled every inch of my newfound sanctuary. My phone chimed softly once more, this time with a different name. Ava. Emily, I've decided to leave town. I'm going home to start fresh. Thank you for helping me find the courage to face the truth. I replied sincerely, we both helped each other, Ava. Thank you for being brave enough to reach out. Setting my phone down gently, I realized Jake's chaos had unintentionally brought Ava, Lily, and me together, teaching us strength we never knew we possessed. Somehow his betrayal had given each of us something priceless, the courage to choose ourselves. Finally, I turned my attention back to Mark's files, gently tracing the embossed logo of his law firm. This was the next step in my journey, not just survival, not just resilience, but purpose and passion. As darkness wrapped softly around my cozy apartment, I whispered quietly to myself, speaking aloud the truth that had transformed my life forever. Sometimes the greatest pain leads you directly to the greatest freedom. The path I'd walked hadn't been easy, but standing here now, stronger, wiser, and fiercely independent, I knew with absolute clarity I wouldn't change a thing. 6 months had passed since that final confrontation, and life had quietly settled into a rhythm I genuinely cherished. Each morning brought peace instead of anxiety. Each evening ended with a sense of fulfillment I had once only dreamed possible. The first day at Mark's law firm marked a new chapter, one I'd written entirely myself. As I walked into the bright, bustling office space, the sense of belonging overwhelmed me gently, washing away years of doubt and insecurity. Colleagues greeted me warmly, respect evident in their smiles. I wasn't Jake's wife here. I was Emily, a woman valued for her strength, her intelligence, her resilience. My new desk faced the skyline, a panoramic view of possibilities stretching endlessly ahead. As I set down my belongings, Mark approached quietly, handing me a cup of coffee. His eyes shone with pride and quiet affection. "You ready?" he asked simply. I smiled brightly, feeling a powerful confidence surge, more ready than I've ever been. As days turned into weeks, my new role at Mark's law firm became more than a job. It became my purpose. I poured my energy into supporting other women facing manipulative partners, helping them reclaim their voices and rewrite their narratives. Each case I touched became another step toward healing, not just theirs, but mine too. One afternoon, while working late in my office, my phone buzzed unexpectedly. The caller ID showed Jake's name. I paused, heart steady, no longer burdened by anxiety or fear. Calmly, I picked up. "Emily?" Jake's voice sounded tired, worn, almost unrecognizable. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. You deserved better. I understand that now." A silence stretched between us, filled with all the things neither of us had left to say. Finally, I spoke, voice gentle but firm. "Jake, thank you. But forgiveness isn't for you, it's for me, and I've already moved forward." I hung up quietly, feeling no anger, no resentment, just a profound sense of peace. Jake's apologies couldn't change the past, but I no longer needed them. My healing didn't depend on his acknowledgement, it depended entirely upon me. Mark and I grew closer, our friendship evolving into something deeper, built on mutual respect, trust, and genuine admiration. Our relationship wasn't about dependence. It was partnership, equal and empowering. One evening, as twilight filled my cozy apartment with a comforting glow, Mark gently took my hand, eyes sincere and full of quiet strength. "Emily, seeing you rebuild your life has inspired me more than you know," he said softly. "But I want you to know, your strength is yours alone. You found it, fought for it, and earned it." My heart swelled with pride, gratitude, and something even deeper, self-love. Smiling warmly, I squeezed his hand gently. "You helped me see who I really am, Mark, and I'll never lose sight of her again." Standing by the window later, watching the city lights flicker warmly below, I realized something powerful. My journey, filled with pain and betrayal, had also given me profound wisdom. Sometimes losing everything is exactly what you need to finally find yourself. My life was no longer about surviving, it was about thriving, about growing stronger from every scar, every struggle. Jake's betrayal had once felt devastating, but now it felt distant, almost insignificant next to the strength I'd discovered within myself. And now, as I stood firmly planted in the life I'd rebuilt, confidence surging quietly through every part of my being, I finally understood the true power of resilience. It wasn't simply enduring pain, it was transforming it, taking control, and using it to shape something stronger, kinder, and infinitely more beautiful. This was my story now, not Jake's, not Ava's, not anyone else's, mine alone. And as I looked toward the horizon, a smile spreading across my lips, I felt nothing but boundless hope and unshakable gratitude. Because in the end, the greatest victory was never about defeating Jake, it was about reclaiming myself, fully, authentically, forever. At last, I knew exactly who I was, and no one could ever take that away from me again.